Imagine pulling off the perfect crime, $6 million gone in an hour, no evidence, no trace. That's the Lufthansa Heist, a daring plan led by Jimmy Burke and immortalized in Goodfellas. But the real story? It's bloodier, crazier, and full of shocking twists. The daring robbery immortalized in Goodfellas was far more chaotic, intricate, and treacherous than the film portrayed, leaving behind a tangled web of intrigue, betrayal, and bloodshed that continues to fascinate decades later. On the night of December 11, 1978, a black Ford Econoline van, stolen for the occasion, waited under the shroud of darkness near the Lufthansa Airlines terminal at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. Inside the vehicle sat a group of men, their identities concealed by ski masks, gripping their weapons as they waited for the opportune moment to strike. At precisely 3:12 a.m., their moment arrived. The van reversed toward the terminal's delivery entrance, and the masked crew silently slipped out, armed and prepared. Within minutes, they had infiltrated the facility. In just over an hour, 64 tense minutes to be exact, the men emerged, vanishing into the night as quietly as they had arrived. Their vehicle was now laden with a jaw-dropping haul, $5 million in untraceable cash, and an additional $875,000 in jewels. At the time, this heist was unparalleled in scale, marking it as the largest theft in American history. The Lufthansa heist quickly captured public imagination, and in the years that followed, it took on an almost mythic status, solidified by Martin Scorsese's cinematic masterpiece in 1990. Yet, the Goodfellas rendition barely scratches the surface of the actual events and the grim aftermath that unraveled in its wake. Despite exhaustive investigations spanning decades, only one man has ever been imprisoned for his involvement in the heist. The full story of this audacious crime reveals the underbelly of 1970s New York, a time and place where such a feat was even conceivable, largely due to the pervasive influence of organized crime. New York City in the 1970s was not just a backdrop for the heist, but a character in its own right. It was an era defined by rampant criminal activity, much of which was orchestrated by the Mafia's notorious five families. The Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese families controlled vast territories of the city, their influence extending into nearly every major crime committed during this turbulent period. Among these families, the Lucchese clan played a central role in the Lufthansa robbery, thanks to the cunning and ruthlessness of one of their most infamous associates, Jimmy Burke. Jimmy Burke, whose cinematic counterpart Jimmy Conway was portrayed by Robert De Niro, was a figure who stood apart from the traditional mafia mold. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Burke was of Irish-American descent, which excluded him from becoming a made man within the Italian-dominated mafia hierarchy. While this limitation might have seemed like a disadvantage, it granted him a unique kind of freedom. Unbound by the rigid loyalties that came with mafia initiation, Burke was free to navigate the criminal underworld on his own terms, forming alliances that served his interests rather than those of a single family. Burke's criminal career began long before the Lufthansa heist, as he proved himself a valuable and resourceful associate for the Lucchese family. His ability to orchestrate large-scale schemes and command loyalty from his crew earned him a reputation as a formidable operator. The heist was the culmination of years of experience, meticulous planning, and a network of connections that Burke had cultivated. Yet, as the events that followed would demonstrate, even the most carefully executed plans can spiral into chaos when greed, paranoia, and betrayal enter the equation. The heist itself was a marvel of precision and nerve, but the aftermath was a descent into violence and mistrust. As the stolen cash and jewels vanished into the hands of the conspirators, so too did any semblance of camaraderie among them. Burke, notorious for his zero-tolerance policy toward loose ends, is believed to have orchestrated a series of murders to ensure the silence of those involved. The once cohesive crew that pulled off the heist was systematically dismantled, leaving a trail of bodies in its wake. Despite the audacious nature of the crime and the subsequent bloodbath, law enforcement struggled to bring the perpetrators to justice. The code of silence ingrained in Mafia culture, combined with Burke's calculated ruthlessness, ensured that crucial evidence and testimony remained elusive. Over the years, investigators pieced together fragments of the story, but the full truth remains shrouded in mystery, much like the millions of dollars that were stolen and never recovered. The origins of the infamous Lufthansa heist trace back to a nondescript tavern in the Ozone Park neighborhood of Queens. This establishment, Robert's Lounge, was no ordinary bar. It was a hotspot for criminal activity, a place where plots were hatched, deals were struck, and loyalties were tested. Owned by Jimmy Burke, this modest-looking bar served as a nerve center for his operations, attracting a steady stream of underworld figures who knew it was the place to be for anyone looking to make or launder money. One evening, amidst the smoky atmosphere and quiet hum of clandestine conversations, Burke's close associate Henry Hill, later immortalized by Ray Liotta in Goodfellas, found himself in a pivotal discussion. Hill was approached by Martin Krugman, a bookmaker with his own web of connections and ambitions. Krugman had news that would set in motion one of the largest robberies in American history. The information he shared concerned a seemingly unattainable prize, $6 million in untraceable cash and jewelry stored at John F. Kennedy International Airport, just waiting for someone bold enough to take it. Krugman's source of this astonishing revelation was a JFK airport worker named Louis Werner. Werner, deeply indebted to Krugman, spilled the details of a vault at the Lufthansa Airlines terminal. The vault was used monthly to house vast sums of currency flown in from West Germany. This money, the proceeds of currency exchanges made by American servicemen and tourists overseas, arrived in untraceable bills, a tantalizingly perfect target for any seasoned thief. Werner had first-hand experience with the vault's vulnerability, having himself stolen $22,000 from it years earlier. If that small theft had been possible, why not something far grander? Burke, ever the opportunist, recognized the immense potential of Krugman's tip. For a significant cut of the proceeds, he agreed to take charge of orchestrating the heist, ensuring it would be executed with the precision and ruthlessness that defined his operations. Over the course of several months, Burke meticulously crafted the plan, drawing on Werner's insider knowledge. Werner provided not just details of the vault's contents, but also critical operational information, where the getaway vehicle should park, the optimal time to strike, and how to navigate the terminal without arousing suspicion. With the logistics taking shape, Burke turned his attention to assembling a crew capable of pulling off such a daring operation. He chose his team carefully, prioritizing loyalty, skill, and a willingness to follow orders without question. Among his selections were Tommy DeSimone, later fictionalized as Tommy DeVito and brought to life by Joe Pesci in Goodfellas, along with Angelo Sepe, Louis Caffera, Joe Chivitello Sr., Tony Rodriguez, Joseph M. Costa, Joe Manry, and Robert McMahon, all trusted Lucchese family associates. To ensure the operation's success, Burke also brought in Paolo Licastri, a Gambino family representative, as a nod to the Mafia's territorial boundaries. Burke's meticulous planning extended to every role in the heist. DeSimone and the rest of the crew were tasked with the actual break-in and theft, using a stolen Ford Econoline van driven by Parnell Stacks Edwards, another of Burke's trusted associates. Meanwhile, Burke's son, Frank, waited outside the airport in a designated crash car, ready to ram any police vehicles that might approach during the operation. The scope of the heist required additional layers of involvement. Paul Vario, a Lucchese captain portrayed by Paul Sorvino in Goodfellas, ensured that his own interests were safeguarded by assigning his son, also named Paul, to oversee the family's cut. Vincent Acero, a high-ranking member of the Bonanno family, was also looped into the scheme to secure his blessing, as the operation technically encroached on Bonanno-controlled territory. These arrangements ensured that the robbery would proceed without interference from competing factions within the Mafia. At the center of it all was Jimmy Burke, orchestrating every detail with his characteristic blend of charm and menace. Burke remained removed from the heist's physical execution, preferring to direct from a distance while ensuring every contingency was accounted for. His true role, however, would come after the heist, as he prepared to deal with the inevitable fallout. Burke had a reputation for tying up loose ends, a chilling euphemism for eliminating anyone who posed a risk to his plans. In the quiet early hours of December 11, 1978, the scene was deceptively ordinary outside the Lufthansa terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport. A stolen Ford Econoline van sat parked nearby, its dark presence blending into the pre-dawn stillness. Inside, tension gripped the men waiting to execute one of the most daring robberies in American history. At exactly 3:12 a.m., their plan was set into motion. The heist began when Kerry Whalen, a cargo agent, noticed the suspicious vehicle and decided to investigate. His curiosity would cost him dearly. As he approached, the van's door swung open, and he was immediately struck with a pistol, the force of the blow knocking him off balance. The assailants dragged him into the van, where his wallet was seized, and he was warned in chilling tones that his family's safety was at stake. Faced with such an ultimatum, Whalen had no choice but to comply, becoming the heist's first pawn. The commotion did not go unnoticed. Another airport worker, hearing the sounds of the scuffle, ventured onto the loading dock to see what was happening. He, too, was quickly overpowered by the masked intruders. By now, the 6 armed men had seized control of the situation. With the key provided by their insider, Louis Werner, they gained entry to the terminal. Once inside, they swiftly rounded up the remaining employees, herding them into a break room. The bloodied Whalen served as a grim warning: resistance was futile. The crew's next target was the Vault, a high-security facility designed to safeguard the treasures that were about to be stolen. But the Vault's 2-door locking system posed a significant challenge. Werner had warned Burke's team that without the proper procedures, the Vault's alarm system would be triggered, and the Port Authority police could lock down the entire airport in under 90 seconds. Such a scenario would mean certain capture. To overcome this obstacle, they needed the Vault's codes, which were known only to one man, Rudy Ilrich. Using a ruse involving a supposed technical problem, the senior cargo agent was forced to summon Ilrich. The unsuspecting man arrived, only to be met by the sight of masked intruders pointing guns at him. Shocked at their apparent familiarity with the Vault's intricate security, Ilrich realized that the men had inside information. Under duress, he complied with their demands, opening the first of the Vault's 2 doors. The operation required precision. Each step in unlocking the Vault followed a strict sequence. The first door had to be unlocked, opened, closed, and locked again before the second door could be accessed. The robbers ensured Ilrich followed the process to the letter, keeping him closely monitored as they worked. Once the initial door was secured behind them, they forced Ilrich to lie face down on the ground while they inspected the cargo manifests. Time was of the essence, but the men worked methodically. From the manifest, they selected roughly 40 parcels containing cash and jewelry. Once their choices were made, Ilrich was instructed to unlock the second door. The cargo was transferred into the chamber between the 2 doors, and the second door was locked behind them. With everything secured, the robbers returned Ilrich to the break room at gunpoint, leaving him with the rest of the employees under guard. By 4:16 a.m., the heist was nearly complete. The stolen cash and valuables were loaded into the waiting Econoline van, ready for a quick getaway. Before leaving, the robbers issued one final threat to the Lufthansa employees: no one was to call the authorities until 4:30 a.m. This delay would give the crew a critical 15-minute head start to vanish into the night. At precisely 4:21 a.m., the Econoline pulled away from the loading dock. True to their word, and out of fear for their lives, the employees waited until 4:30 before raising the alarm. When law enforcement finally arrived, there was no trace of the robbers or the stolen cargo. The meticulously planned heist had unfolded like clockwork, and within just 64 minutes, Burke's crew had pulled off the largest cash robbery in U.S. history. The haul was staggering: $5 million in untraceable cash and an additional $1 million in jewelry. Adjusted for inflation, this amounted to a fortune worth over $20 million today. The Lufthansa heist was a meticulously orchestrated operation, executed with precision and efficiency. It could have easily gone down as the perfect crime, a flawless caper destined to remain unsolved, if not for one disastrous error that unraveled everything. The man responsible for this fatal blunder was Parnell Stacks Edwards, whose careless actions turned an airtight scheme into a catastrophic unraveling. 2 days after the heist, on December 13th, law enforcement received an unexpected tip. A patrol officer in Canarsie, Brooklyn, reported a suspicious van parked in a no-parking zone. The vehicle, a Ford Econoline, bore a striking resemblance to the one described by Lufthansa employees during the robbery. Suspicious of its presence, the officer called it in, and investigators wasted no time responding. Police arrived at the scene with fingerprint specialists, eager to examine the van. Their hunch proved correct. The vehicle was indeed the same one used in the heist. As they dusted for prints, a key piece of evidence emerged, fingerprints belonging to none other than Parnell Edwards, one of the men trusted by Jimmy Burke to play a critical role in the operation. But Edwards wasn't around to answer any police questions. His fate had already been sealed by Jimmy Burke, who acted swiftly and ruthlessly to eliminate the risk posed by Edwards' incompetence. The story of how this pivotal mistake occurred, however, has become infamous in its own right, a cautionary tale about hubris and recklessness. Edwards had a simple yet vital task: to dispose of the van after the heist. With the cash and jewels safely transferred, he was instructed to drive the vehicle to a car compactor in New Jersey and ensure it was destroyed beyond recognition. This step was critical for maintaining the crew's anonymity and covering their tracks. Yet, despite the importance of his mission, Edwards failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. Instead of heading directly to New Jersey, Edwards decided to make a detour to his girlfriend's house in Canarsie. Perhaps feeling invincible after the success of the heist, he let his guard down in a moment of indulgence. Along the way, he stopped to smoke marijuana, a choice that clouded his judgment even further. Instead of parking the stolen van discreetly or continuing on to complete his assignment, Edwards inexplicably left it in a no-parking zone, a glaring oversight for a vehicle that was undoubtedly being sought by law enforcement. The recklessness didn't end there. Once at his girlfriend's house, Edwards continued to celebrate his newfound riches by consuming alcohol and cocaine. His night of excess culminated in him passing out, completely forgetting about the stolen van parked in plain sight on a public street. By the time Edwards woke up, the damage had already been done. The vehicle was discovered, fingerprints were lifted, and the first crack in the crew's otherwise impenetrable plan had formed. When news of Edwards' catastrophic misstep reached Jimmy Burke, his response was swift and brutal. Burke, known for his meticulous planning and zero tolerance for loose ends, recognized the immediate danger posed by Edwards' negligence. Not only had Edwards drawn unwanted attention to the crew, but his fingerprints tied him directly to the crime. The risk of him being apprehended and potentially cooperating with law enforcement was too great to ignore. Burke's solution was characteristically ruthless. He ensured that Edwards would never have the opportunity to talk. This decisive action sent a chilling message to the rest of the crew, reinforcing the consequences of mistakes or disloyalty. But the damage was already done. Edwards' blunder had set off a chain reaction, exposing vulnerabilities in a heist that had seemed foolproof just days earlier. In the chaotic aftermath of the Lufthansa heist, Jimmy Burke's priority was clear: to eliminate any potential threats that could expose his involvement. For Burke, guaranteeing silence was not a matter of negotiation or trust, it was a matter of life and death. His solution was as ruthless as it was effective: silence his associates permanently. As the saying goes, dead men tell no tales, and Burke was determined to ensure there would be no tales to tell. Henry Hill, one of Burke's closest associates who later turned government witness, provided an inside look at the paranoia and brutality that followed the heist. Hill's testimony, along with the FBI's investigations, revealed that the fallout began almost immediately after Parnell Stacks Edwards' disastrous mistake of abandoning the stolen van. This blunder put Burke on edge, plunging him into a state of relentless anxiety. The FBI quickly connected the dots, identifying Burke and his crew as the likely culprits within days of discovering the van. The pressure was mounting, and Burke knew the walls were closing in. To protect himself, Burke resolved to tie up every loose end, no matter how extreme the measures required. Hill later claimed that Burke openly declared his intention to kill anyone who might pose even the slightest risk of implicating him. It didn't take long for Burke to begin carrying out his grim plan. The first casualty was Parnell Edwards, whose negligence had jeopardized the entire operation. Burke dispatched Tommy DeSimone and Angelo Sepe to handle the matter. Edwards was killed in his apartment, the act sending a clear message to anyone else in the crew who might consider stepping out of line. But Burke's wrath didn't stop there. Martin Krugman, whose tip about the Lufthansa vault had set the entire heist into motion, was next on Burke's list. Despite his initial usefulness, Krugman was now a liability. His disappearance was swift and decisive, ensuring he would never speak to the authorities. From there, Burke's vendetta extended to other members of the crew who had participated in the heist. Gunmen who had helped execute the robbery began to vanish one by one. In some cases, Burke didn't stop at the individuals themselves. Even their immediate family members were targeted if Burke suspected they knew too much or might be tempted to talk. The bloodbath unfolded over the course of 6 months, during which nearly every individual with a direct or indirect connection to the heist either disappeared or was found dead. Among the casualties was Burke's own son, Frank, who had been part of the operation. Whether Frank's death was a result of his father's paranoia or another violent fallout from the crime remains unclear, but it underscored the all-encompassing reach of Burke's campaign to cover his tracks. The meticulous and ruthless efficiency with which Burke orchestrated these killings solidified his reputation as a man who would stop at nothing to protect himself. His associates understood that loyalty to Burke was a one-way street. Once you were no longer useful or deemed a risk, you were expendable. By the time Jimmy Burke had orchestrated the elimination of nearly everyone involved in the Lufthansa heist, there was hardly anyone left who could be held accountable for the crime, even if authorities had managed to catch them. Decades after the audacious robbery, which stunned the nation and captivated headlines, only a single person has ever faced imprisonment for direct involvement. The Lufthansa heist, despite its bloody aftermath and widespread notoriety, remains one of the most enigmatic and unresolved crimes in American history. The first and only person to serve time was Louis Werner, a disgruntled airport worker who had provided the robbers with detailed information about the terminal's layout and security. His betrayal of Lufthansa's operations proved crucial to the heist's success. Werner's arrest came just 4 months after the robbery, and in May 1979, he was convicted. His role in facilitating the crime earned him a 15-year prison sentence. Despite his punishment, Werner's conviction did little to unravel the larger conspiracy or bring other perpetrators to justice. In 1980, Henry Hill, another pivotal figure in the criminal underworld tied to the heist, was arrested, not for his involvement in the Lufthansa robbery, but for drug trafficking. Hill, well aware of Jimmy Burke's violent history, feared for his life. Burke had a well-established habit of killing anyone who posed a risk, and Hill was certain he would be next. Rather than wait for his fate, Hill made the bold decision to cooperate with the FBI, offering to become an informant in exchange for protection. His decision to flip was a major blow to the Mafia and an invaluable gain for federal authorities. Hill's cooperation led to the downfall of key figures, including Burke and Paul Vario, a Lucchese family captain. However, neither Burke nor Vario faced charges directly tied to the Lufthansa heist. Vario was convicted on racketeering, gambling, and loan sharking charges, while Burke went to prison for his involvement in a basketball point-shaving scandal. Both men lived out the remainder of their lives behind bars, with Vario passing away in 1988 and Burke following in 1996. For years, it seemed the Lufthansa heist would remain an unsolved mystery, with justice eluding those responsible. But in 2014, more than 3 decades after the crime, there was a glimmer of hope for resolution. Vincent Acero, a high-ranking member of the Bonanno family, was arrested at the age of 78 and charged in connection with the heist. Acero's arrest reignited interest in the case and brought renewed attention to the tangled web of conspirators who had benefited from the robbery. Acero, however, vehemently denied any involvement. His claim was even supported by Henry Hill before Hill's death in 2012. During his trial, Acero maintained his innocence, and in the end, he was acquitted of all charges. His brief stint as a suspect in the heist ended with his release, but trouble soon found him again. In 2017, Acero was involved in a road rage incident that resulted in an 8-year prison sentence. Whatever secrets he may have harbored about the Lufthansa heist now seemed destined to remain buried, locked away with him behind bars. The legacy of the Lufthansa heist is steeped in both myth and bloodshed. Burke's infamous mantra, immortalized in Goodfellas by his fictional counterpart, "Never rat on your friends, and always keep your mouth shut," appears to have been upheld by many of his real-life associates, either out of loyalty, fear, or necessity. Those who might have considered breaking the code were silenced long before they could betray the operation. Even now, the Lufthansa heist remains an open case, its mysteries unsolved and its unanswered questions lingering in the shadows of criminal lore. It is not just a story of an extraordinary robbery, it is a tale of betrayal, loyalty, and the deadly lengths some will go to protect their secrets. The heist's enduring legacy lies not only in the audacity of the crime itself, but in the dark web of violence and silence that followed, ensuring its place as one of the most compelling chapters in American criminal history.